Yes, this talk I gave title Re-territorializing the periphery space through the earthquake reconstruction program in Yushu City. You can see from this picture, Yushu is really a vast and wild place. Basically, the whole Yushu more look like this. It is really like typical periphery space. And then through the earthquake, what happened after earthquake, and then this earthquake reconstruction effort that to re-territorialize the rural space under the domain of the urban space. Here, the urban administrative promotions before Jyekundo town. Jyekundo is just a little town, and that the town belonged to the Yushu County. Now the county are promoted to a city. That city governs before the entire country's territory. So the entire country now become part of the city. There's under the city administrations. That further complicates the private property relations and the public land usage within these county boundaries. Then the remapping of the space under the imposition of regulatory compliance. Government have a lot of new regulations that actually really territorialize the space and make the state power more visible. And this is all about my talk. And let me start from the earthquake itself. The earthquake happened in April 14th of 2010. It caused wide destruction. It was Richter scale 7.1. The aftershock was not only limited to this seismic effect on the quake itself, but also shook the land property relations and the natural disaster that triggered the accelerated and re-territorializations of the urban fringe. The periphery urban land and the wasteland under the name of urban development, everything will change. This massive reconstruction program that launched by the government that triggered the production of a new spatial database. They mapped every inch of this space to prepare a bigger reconstruction plan. This digital map that is imposes a uniformity implementing for the development of reconstruction only, and those map technicians outside people have no idea what of the rural local situations have to finish this job in a few days. So they mapped and digitalized this map, and that became the database for the reconstructions and property relations in the future. And what that will imply for real life, I will explain you later. Then these are the years of farmland abandonment. The farmland has been abandoned before the earthquake. You can see from, can you see my screen, right? Yes. Those farmland has been abandoned for many years, and there's not growing anything, almost to become part of this wild mountain body, part of the mountain body. That also, the household has its own plot, but boundaries are not so clear because of years of abandonment and erosions. And also people forgot their actual size, the fading memories of the old people. Now old people are farmers, young people, there's almost no farmers from young people, they go to schools. So they forgot what is their boundaries. So these all things are like make things are more complicated. If you want to claim your property right, you have to have something clear things, and the local people, I mentioned those things, they are so many things are so vague. And now I just choose one of my interviewees. His name is Tashi, his fake name I gave him, Tashi. What he experienced through this new dynamic of the state land appropriations and urban fringe that are triggered by this earthquake reconstruction. This person, he's a native to this village. He lived there for maybe 4 or 5 generations. He's a really local person. And his location, his home location is the right beside these the Manyan pile, like here. So it's really prime locations for do business, because these villages, there's so many people from outside to circumambulate or tour or things. So whatever space you have, you kind of rent it out for front shops or guest house. So people no longer need for growing barley. So he and his neighbors all running little shops, space for guest house. And the space, the house, what they have is like they inherited from their ancestral families. They live there for generations. And then this village is no longer village, it now becomes city. So village, the name of village is like this street, that street, just like the city. And then this old man planned to move to his farmland to build his home, and then make more space for run business for his current home. Not only this old man, but other neighbors also have this idea. And do they really own that farmland? That's still questionable. Let's find out what happened. And this is basically the story settings. Then because their property relations are not so clear, the lack of this I look at the literature, the Vederi said that lack of routine rules and crystallized practice around property rights, then the property cannot really be guaranteed. Then there's a fuzzy relationship, the unclear property relationship and the rights that allows government to, to grab the land so easily. Collective ownership, because the farmland is owned by the farmers collectively. No individual household not really own the land, but as a collectively, in call it Chiti Soyuji. So then that also is really vague. If you want to define what is collective ownership, it's a little complicated. I will go that more details. And then Sonam, the Dashi and his villagers found that there's no legal framework to support their farmland ownership claim. The ambiguity of land rights that confers to the power of the state to exclude or include the land access. The individual property owners in the village is just under the umbrella of collective owners. What is the really collective owners is another ambiguities. The member of collective ownership has less clarity about their land ownership. And then there's a fuzziness of the collective ownership and the responsibility for the ownership that allows the authority to interpret what is ambiguous land ownership. In the end, the government really interpret what is the collective ownership. So they decide. And then someone call it deliberate institutional ambiguity. That really enables the state to exercise its power to implement whatever plan they have. And the prototype resource frontier there's collective ownerships and ambiguity that already kind of formed a prototype resource frontier that lies in the ambiguity on the land ownership. And the deliberate institutional ambiguity that is the resulted in the one-sided resolution to conflict of interest among like different players. The resource frontier is the main concept that I use in this study. I will come back that more and more. And first, let me show where my study is done. This is a Yushu prefecture, that is the little yellow strip one. And then that located in the part of Qinghai province, and then overall the China's map. Yushu is a really big place, just you know, from here border with the Sichuan, and here bordering with the Xinjiang. In the Sichuan, the Xinjiang is just in two different places, but Yushu filled this gap. Yushu, this make the Yushu, this study is more unique. The 4 years of earthquake reconstructions that provide ultra-intensified development experiences that accelerated the intensified in many dynamic and potential their urban development. This government reconstructions, I call it mega project of earthquake reconstructions, that have to done in like 4 years, really intensified. Then plus the usual construction season is short, and only this construction season's windows of 6 months, I guess. The rest of the time is like frozen, sub-zero. You cannot do constructions. It's really intensified. Then the Yushu has the populations of just over 400,000 people, and 98% of the people are Tibetan ethnic, which make the Yushu is the highest portions of minority in the prefectures. In the China's 30 minority prefectures, the highest, not one of, but highest. Therefore, the urbanization of Yushu really gave examples of the territorial urbanisms in minority-dominated regions. The location of Yushu is the middle of nowhere. I use the middle of nowhere. If you go zoom the Google map, really middle of nowhere. Yushu to the provincial cities like the Xinyi, 800 kilometers. I then measured from Yushu to Chengdu, it's about 1,300. Then 1,500, and in between, there's no major city, maybe some county towns and little small city, and then that make the Yushu is the regional hub for transportation and trade centers, and all people surrounding the 100 kilometers radius range, people come to Yushu. That really like make the Yushu special, and that also is a precondition for Yushu to become a really city. And then, well, what was Yushu like before the earthquake? Can you see the whole things? Because this I cannot see.
Yes.
Okay, that's fine. Because these people's face are blocked the screen. So that's fine. Yeah, if you see it, that's fine. Before the earthquake reconstructions, locals and immigrants, I mean immigrants of Tibetans from neighboring countries who want to live in Yushu, they come and build and torn down again, repeatedly construct and demolish their homes from spring to fall every year. That is my memory. I grew up in this area, and this the prototype urban space that characterized by like spontaneous expansions, no plan, the free from any regulations, lack of formalizations. It was chaotic. It's frontier dynamics. And there's no don't need to any permissions, and anyone can do anything if you get along with your neighbors or whoever you bought land from. And this spontaneous development potentially challenges if the city want to build a nice modern city. So it's challenges the high modernism urban development type. And the high modernism the development type that is mentioned by the what called this his name is Jim Scott. He mentioned about high modernism development. It's scientifically designed, visually beautiful, and it's cut from all the traditions and random development. And if the city government want to build according to high modernism, it imposes a lot of challenges because the space is filled with those spontaneous development. For example, in the 90s, the Jyekundo town, that time called Jyekundo town, government attempted to make the street wide, but the implementation is very difficult because they have confront with those nail house, which is a translation of Chinese word 钉子户. It's like nail. You have to pull the nail, that called nail house, meaning like those stubborn family refuse to compromise. They're difficult to implement, like grand city plan. And if you compensate those family, also it's increase the cost. And they face that challenges, and they're unwilling to compromise over the personal interest. When the property owner refuse to compromise or demolish their properties to the authorities, they refuse to renew or refuse the financial compensations, then it's very difficult to implement according to the plan. That's the part, that's what I remember. I also wrote, this is a quote from my memory. I remember tractors accelerating to pull the full load of sands from the riverbed because our school is located nearby the rivers. Always hear the tractors pulling sands from the riverbed. Those are the construction materials for the individual households. And then you can hear people blew up rock or use the diamond and to build the stones, and then you can hear the construction, the noise of a chain machine, saw machines, and this kind of memories really tells what is going on those times. And those houses not really last long. People changes a few years later, they think someone built a better house, they rebuild it. And in the 80s, most houses are adobe stone structure house. And then mixture of concrete and the bricks available, and more transportation, truck, all those things available, so can get access to better materials. And then later the access to like concrete and the steel infrastructures, and slowly the city every year changes. Every few years you look about the city, the outlook of cities are changed. But no matter how change in the surface, the underground infrastructure was not in place. I mean, I use off the grid. It was characterized for the most residential areas development, because there's no utilities like water and sewer systems, and much of the physical development atop on surface are repeatedly built every few years. They changes. Then the earthquake came. Then changes everything. The earthquake that make the surface empty first. I use emptiness, was further reinforced by the massive destructions of earthquake, and then rubbles that left behind, that gave new opportunities for urban development and modernizations. This urban space was empty of established buildings that allowed the state to have imagined new way of development space. The space that also provide some elite capture or capitalist accumulations, because since it was empty, my advisor, he uses that called elite captures and capitalist accumulations at the cost of a local inhabitant who bears the dispossessions of land resources. The state interventions, the migrants and land grabbing, and collectively produce a multiple dynamics of overlapping frontier experiences in this accelerated urban development. These rubbles of the destructions caused by earthquake that produce huge pile of pile of materials that have to clean. The government spent, I think, possibly 6 months of time to clean those all things, dump somewhere, and then part of this, the city become empty, really literally empty. When I walk from the trace of pedestrians, I can look around, I can directly see the mountains. There's nothing to block my views. It's literally become empty. And it's that empty means like empty paper. You can write whatever you want. That gives the state opportunity to implement high modernism development. And this debris, the debris cleans a disaster. The cleaning that created the empty space, then and then this earthquake is so important in the recent people's memory, and the people uses the prepositions like before and after to point out the contemporary urban development issue. We always say before the earthquake, what word? After the earthquake, what? The reconstruction efforts that resulted everlasting impact on the administrative systems, because urban become city, the city system from some county system to urban systems. Then land property relations that changed, more formalized. And then these demographic structures also changed, and more immigrants and poured in. Then this empty space that demolished from the town that allowed the government to, I can see the pictures here, and they're more geometrically beautiful. And before it was built, it's just completely empty. Before the earthquake, it's just a random house. The street is not the street, and it's zigzag all around shape. And yeah, you can see the differences. This is a high modernism ideology that that time there's a slogan called the earthquake reconstructions that pushed the Yushu 20 years of leaping frog development. The slogan I translated, they said, 苦干3年，跨越20年, like 3 years of hard work, actually 4 years, because the construction season shortened the period of the hard work. Okay, next. The resource frontier. Yeah, I repeatedly mentioned about resource frontier. Then what is really resource frontier? The resource frontier, I use land and the pillar. So this said the authority and sovereignties. Then the recent past has been currently being challenged by new closures and territorializations and puppet regimes. Basically, there's an old way of life and a new way that replaced by a new way of life. Then there's a kind of conflict that create a resource frontier. And the frontiers moments offers new opportunities, and old social contract gives a way to a struggle over a new one, that quote unquote. The frontier dynamic, therefore, radically changed the existing social orders for the property relations and political jurisdictions, rights, and the social contracts. The urban frontiers are taking place in many urban sites across like rural China. When there's a rural land become to urban land, that things happened. In the Yushu, the frontier dynamics that is accelerated and intensified by these earthquake reconstructions that make it like a little different. It make it like showcase of urban transformations in accelerated space-time compressions. There's a frontiers resource is a dynamic of social controls and challenge the new, challenge the existing institution arrangement, quote unquote. And then my advisors and my colleagues point out that frontier is characterized by the incompleteness of the state control in the space considered not yet civilized, where the civilization awaits to take place, the new of the colonizers. That means like this, before the states not really control those space. Now through earthquake, there is a, that gave states opportunity to territorialize. And I hope now people have an idea about what is frontiers. Historically, the frontier is like used in the Wild West US. When the settlers march into the West, they think that West is empty. Actually, there's Native Americans already there, but what it comes with new way of life, political systems, and then frontiers provide for the newcomers, provide a bountiful of resources. Then the frontier is in this liminal space. We also use liminal space, like something like more like in Tibetan word pardo, like between the old and the new, something like these transitions. And this liminal space of the state from incompleteness to the state control, the space is subject to the civilized and developed, quote unquote. And then when the state controls the land, a lot of land grabbing happens, particularly in the urban fringe, not only Yushu, but in the rest of China. That is a common phenomena. These geographical imaginations of emptiness for some people, because those farmers' land ownership, whatever before, is not really fully legally protected. So it's kind of empty, free from legally binding establishment that enables the imaginations and ideas put into like a nation building project or urban development project. In the issue, these imaginations, the emptiness was further reinforced by massive destructions and earthquake. And that also make the Yushu's case is a little bit different. In the issue, the orders and the new orders that clashed, contrast over the issue of government systems, property relations, and agricultural land use. This earthquake and the urban fringe had been experiencing a slow and unplanned expansions of the residential level development for so many years. Now, suddenly, there's accelerated development that created all those issues more visible. Okay, land under revenue resources. Then why state that they grab land? There's a lot of literatures, scholarly written journal literatures about China's urbanizations, particularly focused on the land resource and revenue resources. These literatures point out that the driving urbanizations, like out migrations from rural to urban, farmland abandonment, surplus labor flow to non-agricultural sectors, and while the China's system, the rural and urban dual structure system that's sustained by hukou. The hukou is a little booklet that has a record of your birthplace, parents' name, and your ID number. It's very important. It's more like basically it functions for so many things. Very important ID numbers. That also sustained these rural and urban the systems. Then, since the landlord does not permit the farmers in the villages to sell their land to a non-agricultural purpose, that also the government can easily grab land into the state, become state-owned land, and then they sell this land with a very high price to a real estate developer. That's most the cities in inner China. That was the case. The rural land has become essential resources for urbanizations in China. All the land, it's still very unclear. First, all the land belonged to the state. Then they said that urban land belong to state, and the rural land I mentioned before belong to, collectively belong to farmers. But there's also a lot of unclear part. Then if all land belong to state, then what about collective ownership? So there's some kind of ambiguities. Then the state make profits from the land leasing for developers. Land as a really valuable resources. The state control the rural land by transferring it into urban land. So rural land is cheap agricultural land, but you have to transfer this to non-agricultural purpose land, and then its land value increases. According to a report, the land use sale in China that aggregated almost a quarter of local government's budget from 1995 to 2002. But in 2011, that increased to 40% of a local government's budget. So the land revenue is a big deal for local government. That's why you can see the urban expanded rapidly, and the local government and the government in general make tons of money. In the last 40 years, the urban and rural-urban dualism produce low-wage laborers, and that the capitalizations of the rural land through the land transferring to urban land, and then the rural migrations in the massive scales that make the fast expansions of the urban in China. The land-based revenue that generate the contemporary urbanization of China. That's the engine power of the urbanizations behind. Land is a very lucrative resources for local government. Leasing the land to commercial developers generate enormous profit for the local government. And the finance that can able to finance the urban infrastructures and the land leasing revenue, the land revenues that drives urbanizations and modernizations and the local according to the state's ideological and political achievement. The local state that produces the territorial power and urban development, where the societies are different actors that adopt the land transference and to also the farmers try to struggle to protect their land. So many dynamics are happening in this process. By integrating the rural land and the urban land in the urban fringe, the urban government really gained great authorities over the rural land. So it's farmers really difficult to protect their land over the state. Then this urbanization is not only China, but it's a global trend. The urban development that dominates the development sphere of China. These unprecedented skills of China's urbanizations has no match anywhere in history. And behind this rapid urbanization, that the land revenue that really power the urbanizations. And now almost 4 billion Chinese citizens that live in city. And in China now already have 221 cities that populations above 1 million. I think Zurich is less than 1 million. China has 221 cities that above 1 million population, and some cities are just a mega city, over 20 million populations. Chongqing probably is, I heard that is the biggest city, maybe 30 million, something like that. Now 40%, 60% of Chinese people are living in urban area. And by 2030, probably 70% of the entire Chinese population will be in city. So city is really a big phenomena, but it is a global trend too. The national trend and the global trend both are accelerating. The French philosopher and the sociologist Henry Lebras said that China exploits economic and political benefits from urbanizations for demography and ideological and sociological reasons. Anyway, China is really growing fast. This is overview of the urbanization in general in China, but the issue case is a little bit different. First, this land revenue is not really big things because there's not much real estate developers to sell land for government to buy land, then build something. And there are also no industrializations that to absorb the rural surplus laborers to live in city. And it's a little bit different than the rest of China. The usual urban development is the state investments from the earthquake. It's a big chunk of money, and the total investment is something like that, according to official record, $7 billion US. And yeah, that allows to build that city. Then territorial urbanizations. What is really territorial urbanizations? According to Cartier, the absorptions of rural administrative structures into urbanisms, the element of territorial urbanization that produces state power and merge rural space into urban territory. I already explained that county town that promoted to a city upgraded to another level of administrative systems. That is the territorial urbanizations. And we say that marketization of land resource and urban development become instruments of the entrepreneurial state and incorporate the urban fringe space into urban development plans. And yes, if you treat the state as a company, it exactly like doing that. It is like entrepreneurial state, and it's really good at how to produce, values from land, and it's continually doing. It's run by this economical marketizations systems. Therefore, the territorial urbanizations under the upgrade of the administrative systems that become solutions to consolidate the relationship between space, people, and power. The urban development under the administrative promotions, development zones, territorial urbanization become important instruments for this entrepreneurial state, quote unquote. The process of the territory urbanizations, the previous orders of the property relationship has to give way to a new form of territorial order. That is like resource frontier I already mentioned about. Then, but from this process, there's a lot of resistance and violent struggles to protect their farmland that happen. The rapid urbanizations and contemporary China that consumes agricultural land and the urban outskirts and the fringe to expand the city's territory. And this process that clashes with the farmers' land, and that always one kind of instabilities in rural China. The land grabbing by state authority is kind of enforced like urban development strategy in like urban fringe, inner cities, and in like a rural development area close to city. The land grabbing by this city become internal territorializations, because people think that territorializing is one state come to a completely new frontier to try to incorporate that to the state system, but those are already part of the state. So it's internal territorializations. The territorializations can also have like multiple territorialization. Sometimes I use a re-territorializations, reinforce the state influence over those space. Xin uses a term, the territorial concrete, that refers to the process of consolidating the state power and into this space. The Xin's conceptualizes the local states urbanizations as active rules of space making, where the state constructs like physical stuff, then territorial and ideological urbanisms build something, visible things too. The team cooks the frame urbanization as an ideological project that is from future-oriented native narratives for prosperous modern countries and cities that always the state want to people to know. The Henry Lebret says that an image of representation of city can perpetuate itself, survive its conditions, and inspire ideology and urbanist project, and quote unquote. So how the city look like? how the state presents the cities to people. It's very important. It's kind of ideological reasons for the states and subject relations. What? The property relations and land preparations. The state, China's land has like two types of land in China. One is urban land, one is the rural land. I already said that urban land belongs to state, rural land is belong to the collectively farmers. But in same times, all land belong to the state. The rural land is a valuable resource for state revenue that I already talked about. The demand for land from urban expansions for under industrial requirement, you have to get those space from this rural land. And then these farmers' access to land is not really farmers own the land. It's kind of merely function as a land maintenance. The farmers cultivate the land, it maintains. Eventually, farmers do not really own the land, and the maintenance is necessary for land. The ambiguities about rural land ownership that induces disputes over the land ownerships. The institutional ambiguity, and one literature says that it's deliberately making ambiguities so that it's not clearly written. So there's more room for interpretations of the land ownership by the state. That ambiguity allows local government to require more resource and a strategy to territorialize the new urban fringe. The revenues from the land grabbings that enable the state to deliver a public service and the health, education, and pensions, etc. This is not only, this is like a common phenomena in China. The state emphasizes the importance of public interest over private interest. They always said when these public interest and the private interest contrast, so you have to, the private interest have to go away for public interest. This is also a characteristic of the socialist country. And the former socialist countries also have the ambiguity issues, land, because in the socialist countries, the public ownership is prized, and the private things like look down a little bit, and still have that kind of legacies in these systems, and people have to deal with this. So then there's a, plus the farmers don't have any documentations and certificates to provide as their land ownerships, because when you don't have anything to provide and you forgot your land boundaries from your forgotten memories, and the physical land boundaries are not clear because you did not maintain the land, it's very difficult for, it's not good for the farmers to clean. If you continue farm, every year farm, it clearly, you have clear boundaries of your farmland, then it's probably difficult to grab. If you grab, maybe you can have increase the bargaining chip. I also mentioned this to local villagers. Why did you cultivate that for a long time ago? You already abandoned, even you forgot your land size and boundaries. Okay, now I goes to these pictures. Here is my research area. These lands before it was farmland. Actually farmland 20 years ago, mostly those are farmland. And you can see it here, dot and the dot, a lot of dots. People build something there after the earthquake. And then government took that. They torn down everything and forcefully took it. Those people, they bought this land from local farmers, and some of the local farmers, their own staff. The old gentleman that I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, his land is somewhere here. So he wants to build his home here, move from here to there. And later the government grabbed this land and people protested. It didn't work. And they tried to bargain. Whatever the state offers, there's no way to bargain. People don't have any certificate to protect their land. And this land law is ambiguous. So they have to give away this. And the government took this land to build elderly home. I visited this elderly home. It actually quite nice. And then this area, those dots are some immigrants families. They bought land from local farmers. Some are local farmers, they own build something and later torn down everything. And it's legally built things. Those are greenhouses still functioning as agricultural purpose and belong to the farmers. They lease this for like Chinese farmers who grow vegetables. Chinese are good at grow vegetables. So still used as agricultural land. And these are not. Okay. Those are these farmers, sorry. Those are the farmers, they build the guest house and build storefront shop, they rent it out, they're doing the constructions. And this is another pictures that during the earthquake reconstructions, and all of those space before was farmland, and they took it and build something. Okay, how many minutes left?
Difficult. Oh, normally 3 minutes, but you can take more time if you want. We have half an hour all in all.
Okay. Yes. No problem. Yes. And then go here, go here, or go here. And then here is called a red line. We call a red line, that's metaphor. The red line is to restrict anything inside the red line is construction-free zones that the state imposed the red lines. So red line, you cannot build anything inside. That's why those are torn down. And then this land value decreases. Some people bought land and now red zones, they cannot sell it because people cannot sell it and you cannot build anything. And that line make the prices really big differences. And this has happened in during the constructions. And now I think last year, this kind of the red line, the regulations a little bit relaxed. And some people bought land and they transferred the land usage to non-agricultural things. Then they resell it for someone because they have document to sell for the land. And this is frontier resources. Once these two systems, nothing is really settled, but still in a dynamic process. And some people take the chance. It's kind of the system loops. They take the chance to make the profits from this loop. So this frontier resource dynamic is always changing. After the earthquake, before the earthquake, after a few years of the reconstructions, because the reconstructions time is so many levels of states oversee are involved. So everything is tightly controlled. But after earthquake for years, maybe things are a little bit relaxed, and then another new kind of resource frontier emerged and is still going on. So I don't know what will continue this will leads to. And this is just try to conclude this, and it is verifications of the state territorializations in the urban frontier through empirical details of how underground narratives of urbanizations. The frontier is conceived as unregulated space, which incomplete assertions of state territorial power, then increasingly consolidated. In this space, the relationship between urbanizations and the state powers, the property ownership and transformation of rural land to urban land resources, the new liberal economic reform, political stabilities are becoming realigned. So thank you so much. This is my talk, a little bit of math. And if you have questions.